Alright, so I just picked up this McWill Game Gear, fully modded, fully recapped, professionally installed, with an Everdrive X7, Everdrive-GG X7, for $300 Canadian, which is actually a pretty good deal. May seem like a lot, to some of you, but keep in mind the price of the McWill screen mod alone is about $115 US. And the price of the Everdrive-GG X7 is about $125 US. That alone, for those two items, that is $300 Canadian. So I basically got this thing professionally installed in a fully recapped Game Gear for free. Coincidentally, right after I bought this, I also saw in the Metal Jesus Rocks video where he was doing pickups going around to different game stores. And one of those game stores was selling a McWill Game Gear fully recapped for I think it was $280 or $290 US. That's like $360 Canadian. So I paid a lot less than that for one with the Everdrive. And again, that Everdrive is like $125 US. I also, saved shipping. I didn't pay any shipping or duty. So if I ordered the Everdrive and the screen, I would have had to pay shipping, and I might have got dinged with duty or taxes coming across the border. So I actually paid less for this than it would have cost me to just buy the screen and the Game Gear. So I think it was actually a pretty good deal. It is certainly not every day around here locally that I am going to see one of these for sale. And so it looked like it was in good shape. It was professionally installed by a guy who I found on Twitter. And it looks like he does this professionally. He posts a lot of stuff on Twitter with his, setup, and customers are sending him his Game Gears. He does everything, like PC engines. He's got PC engine GTs, Turbo Expresses, with aftermarket screens in those. And if you've ever looked at the McWill mod, any replacement LCD mod for a Game Gear, it's actually a pretty complex installation. It's a lot more difficult. It's a lot more involved than the Game Boy. This is an early version of the mod. So this is an early version of the McWill kit, and it doesn't have the brightness adjustment on it, unfortunately. It just runs at full brightness all the time. So sometimes it could be a little too bright, maybe, if you just want to play at night. And, of course, if you could lower the brightness of the screen, you would improve the battery life. This thing at full brightness, you're not really improving the battery life over the stock screen. Yes, it's a lot brighter and it looks a lot better, but you're not really improving the battery life. Maybe a little bit, but not as much as if you could lower the brightness, if you had adjustable brightness. The later McWill kits, the later revisions of the kit, they do have a brightness adjustment where you use the contrast wheel on the Game Gear, and that will control the brightness. But this one's like an early revision, so it doesn't have that. That's kind of my biggest complaint. There's some minor complaints. The screen doesn't scale evenly. We got lucky with the Game Boy mods. When they found a replacement LCD that would work, they just so happened to find one that would be the right size in filling the screen opening and have a perfect scaling, 2x scale on the horizontal, 2x scale on the vertical, and that would fit perfectly into the stock window. That's almost luck, and you can't always expect that's going to happen. This replacement screen is a higher resolution screen than the Game Gear's original screen, but it's not an even 2x scale in either the horizontal or the vertical. So you're typically going to have a little bit of interpolation, some non-integer scaling artifacts. And so it doesn't look perfect, but the thing is, it looks a million times better than the stock screen. So, on one hand, some people might complain, it doesn't look perfect. Well, again, it's so close to being perfect, and it looks a million times better than the stock screen. There's no screen tearing. The screen's fast. It's not blurry when stuff moves quickly. And there is some scaling options I will show that can help with some of the shimmering issues with the non-integer scaling. So you do have some options there. Because the Game Gear is basically a Sega Master System inside, it can play Sega Master System games. You may know that there was a little adapter to play Sega Master System cartridges on a Game Gear, and you're really just converting the cartridge shape because, again, a Sega Master System is so close to, a Sega Game Gear, I should say, is so close to a Sega Master System inside that it's basically backwards compatible. It can natively play Sega Master System games. And I think the Sega Master System, because it was based on like the Japanese SG 1000 Mark III, and I'm guessing that was natively backwards compatible. I'm guessing that was natively backwards compatible with like SG 1000 games on the Master System, or the Mark III, I should say. And so once you have once you have an Everdrive, you can play like all the Game Gear games, but you can also play Master System games, and you can also play the Mark 1 or the SG 1000 games. So that's really cool. Now, normally on a stock Game Gear with that lower resolution screen, the resolution of a Game Gear is lower than the resolution of a Master System. Hence why most Game Gear games, compared to the Master System games, it looks like you're cropped in. You don't see as much playfield on the screen at once. It's a much lower resolution, so that's what happens. But because this McWill screen is a higher resolution than the stock Game Gear screen, Sega Master System games actually look really good on it. They look a lot better than Sega Master System games on a stock screen. In terms of resolution and scaling, small text would often be very hard to read, possibly sometimes impossible to read on a stock Game Gear screen. But here with the higher resolution screen, Sega Master System games actually work out even better. So that's cool. This is a great way to play Sega Master System games on a Game Gear. Okay, so this is how the scaling options work. Turn this thing on. By default, it's going to be like a non-integer scale, horizontal and vertical, but it fits the screen. For most people, including myself, this is fine and really how I would play it most of the time. So hence it's the default. I think they picked a good default. When you turn this on, this is always where it's going to go. Holding down buttons 1, 2, and start at the same time will toggle your scaling options. So the first one's just scan lines. And then we get one that is integer scaled on the horizontal resolution, but it's obviously cropping the top and bottom a little bit. The next one's going to be the same with scan lines. Then we got a 1-to-1, so pixel perfect, but obviously the screen being a higher resolution than the original screen, the screen being a higher resolution than the game, we're going to get a smaller image. But if you want pixel perfect sharp pixels and no non-integer scaling, no shimmering, you can play it like this if you want to. I feel like we missed one. We've got original with scan lines. There we go, we did. This one is 1-to-1 integer scaled on the vertical resolution, but not the horizontal. So when you're playing a game like this, that any side-scrolling game that scrolls a lot left to right, but not as much up and down, you're not going to get the shimmering when it's scrolling left to right, and you're only going to crop a little bit off the sides. So this is probably the second most common, I think, scaling option you'd want to use. And then this one with scan lines looks pretty good. With the integer scale, the scan lines make sense. They look kind of weird when you're in the non-integer scaled modes. So this is probably the second most common way to play it if you don't want any shimmering in a side-scrolling game. And if you want the scan lines, it kind of looks a little bit more like the original screen. And again, they're back to the default. On the Everdrive X7, we do have an in-game menu for save states. And so that is holding down 1, 2, and up. Here you can save state, load state, and actually back to menu. So instead of having to turn the system off and then back on again, if you're in the middle of playing a game and you want to play a different game, you can just go back to menu. And it's like resetting the system. So that's very handy. Overall, I'm very happy with this thing, and to me, it was worth $300. Now, keep in mind, $300 Canadian, so what, $250? We'll just call it something like that. I mean, depending how you look at it, you can buy a Nintendo Switch Lite for $240 Canadian. I think that's what, like $200 US. So this thing costs more than a Nintendo Switch, and some people who don't understand might look at this and go, "Why would you spend $300 on a Game Gear?" But at the same time, I'm a big fan of the Game Gear. I think it's very comfortable to hold in hand. I often do better playing games on a real Game Gear than I do playing them on an emulator, and I don't necessarily think that's just because of the input lag and the emulator issues. I think there's just something about when you're holding it in your hand and the screen is right there beside your hands, and it's very comfortable. To me, the Game Gear is very comfortable to hold. I've always liked actually playing games on a real Game Gear, and here with this screen, it's an amazing upgrade. And these screens aren't going to be cheap. This scaler board is very customized, allowing for a modern LCD panel to work in a Game Gear. I've always said with these IPS mods on the Game Boys and stuff like that, that you're really paying for that scaler board. That's customized hardware. That's a customized PCB that was made just for this purpose. And really, that's more expensive than the screen itself. So you're paying for the screen, but just keep in mind you're paying for that scaler board, that custom driver board is really what you're paying for. And so these mods aren't cheap. And getting it installed, again, this mod is not easy to do. If I was going to pay someone to install it, that might cost me $80. So, had I bought the screen, fully recapped a Game Gear, got a good working Game Gear to begin with, and then sent that off for someone to mod, that's going to be an extra $80. And so buying a Game Gear, getting it recapped, making sure it works good, the sound works good, and then buying the screen, this has a tempered glass screen cover, and buying the Everdrive, it would have cost me easily $450 if you looked at everything all separately. So again, I think this was a pretty good deal. Whether that one in the Metal Jesus Rocks video, whether that's too expensive or not, you tell me. I think it was $280 US, about $360 Canadian. And again, that didn't come with the Everdrive, and that's $125 US for that Everdrive. Came with a 16 gig SD card and all set up, ready to go. Game Gear, Master System, SG-1000. That was all set up by the previous owner. So I think I did pretty good. And again, you don't see these around here very often. I've never seen the screens for sale. I've never seen people who offer the screen installs. I've never seen a modded Game Gear. I don't think I've ever seen one for sale locally around here. So the fact this popped up locally, I didn't have to pay shipping. I was able to just pick it up and buy it and see it working before I paid for it as well. I think it was worth it. To me, it's worth it. If you're a fan of the Game Gear and you enjoy playing the real Game Gear, like me, you find it comfortable in your hands, I think it's worth it. But, again, $300 isn't cheap, and some people are going to look at this and think, well, you could have bought, a Nintendo Switch almost for that, or a Switch Lite and a game. I own a Switch Lite. I own several games for it. I love the Switch. In a way, the Switch Lite kind of reminds me of what the evolution of the Game Gear would be, especially because there's so many Sega games on the Switch. You're playing Virtual Racing Deluxe or whatever it's called on the Switch, and it kind of feels like you're playing the natural evolution of what a Game Gear would have been. Big, wide format in your hands. I find it's comfortable to hold. And now with an awesome screen, this thing is awesome. And again, totally worth it for me. Probably not worth it for everyone, but there you go. See you guys later.